World War I killed 17 million people. And honestly, a solid chunk of that tragedy happened because of decisions so stupid they'd get rejected from a comedy script. A wrong turn with no GPS, bright red pants against gray mud, a general who attacked the same hill 11 times and blamed his soldiers when it failed. This wasn't just brutal, it was absurd. These are 33 of the dumbest facts about the Great War. 1. In June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary visited Sarajevo, where assassins were literally waiting along his route. The first attempt failed when a bomb bounced off his car. But here's where it gets stupid. Later that day, his driver took a wrong turn down a narrow street and stalled the car while trying to reverse. Standing right there on the sidewalk, purely by coincidence, was Gavrilo Princip, one of the failed assassins, who had given up and was getting a sandwich. He looked up, saw the Archduke sitting 5 feet away, pulled out his pistol, and fired twice. Those 2 bullets killed the Archduke and his wife, triggered a chain of alliances, and launched a war that killed 17 million people. No GPS, no Google Maps, just one catastrophically wrong turn. 2. The Battle of Tanga in 1914 was supposed to be Britain's easy victory against a small German force in East Africa. It became one of the most embarrassing military disasters in British history, and the Germans weren't even the main problem. When British Indian troops landed and pushed through the jungle, they accidentally disturbed massive hives of African killer bees. Thousands of furious insects attacked anything that moved. Soldiers dropped their weapons and ran screaming toward the beach. The chaos was so complete that the British abandoned the attack entirely, leaving behind equipment, rifles, and their dignity. The Germans, who also got stung but held their ground, collected enough abandoned British supplies to equip their forces for months. They literally won a battle because bees chose violence. 3. In 1917, French engineers came up with a plan so crazy it might have worked if the war lasted a bit longer. They started building a full-scale replica of Paris about 15 miles north of the real city. This fake Paris had wooden buildings, electric lights along fake Champs-Élysées, and even a replica of the Gare du Nord train station. The idea was that German night bombers, navigating by landmarks, would see the lights, think they'd found Paris, and drop their bombs on empty fields instead. Construction was still ongoing when the war ended in 1918, so we never got to see if German pilots would actually fall for a decoy city made of plywood and light bulbs. The ruins were quietly dismantled, and most Parisians never even knew they had a stunt double. 4. When France marched to war in August 1914, their infantry looked absolutely magnificent and completely doomed. French soldiers wore bright blue coats and, more importantly, brilliant red trousers that had been military tradition since 1829. The problem was that every other major army had already switched to khaki, gray, or field green because, camouflage helps you not die. When French politicians suggested maybe changing the pants color before the war minister reportedly declared that red trousers are France, and eliminating them would be unpatriotic. So tens of thousands of French soldiers charged into battle looking like walking targets against muddy fields and gray skies. It took massive casualties in the first months of war before France finally admitted that perhaps being fashionable was less important than being invisible. New Horizon blue uniforms arrived in 1915. 5. The Eastern Front in winter was brutal beyond imagination. Temperatures plunged, supplies ran out, and corpses piled up everywhere. This created a secondary problem nobody had planned for, namely massive packs of wolves drawn by the smell of death. By 1917, wolf attacks on soldiers became so frequent and so deadly that something unprecedented happened. Russian and German troops in certain sectors arranged informal truces specifically to hunt wolves together. Soldiers who had been trying to kill each other for years formed joint hunting parties, shot wolves side by side, then returned to their trenches and resumed shooting at each other. The wolves were apparently such a menace that they achieved what diplomats couldn't, getting enemies to briefly cooperate. Once the wolf population was reduced, the killing between humans continued as scheduled. 6. Italian General Luigi Cadorna looked at the Isonzo River on the Austro-Hungarian border and decided this was where Italy would break through. When the First Battle of the Isonzo failed in 1915, he tried again, and again, and again. 11 times, Kadorna launched major offensives at essentially the same positions. 11 times, his armies suffered horrific casualties for minimal gains. Each time, he seemed genuinely surprised that frontal assaults against fortified mountain positions didn't work. His strategy was basically, maybe if we do exactly the same thing but with more men, it'll work this time. It never did. The 12 battles combined killed over 300,000 Italian soldiers and wounded over 700,000 more. Kadorna blamed his troops for lack of fighting spirit, rather than admitting his tactics were the military equivalent of running headfirst into the same wall repeatedly. 7. The British Army had many regulations during World War I, but perhaps none more peculiar than the official mustache requirement. The King's regulations explicitly stated that soldiers were forbidden from shaving their upper lip. Every British soldier was legally required to grow a mustache. No exceptions. This wasn't just tradition or preference, it was military law, and violating it could result in disciplinary action. The reasoning was that mustaches projected masculine authority and military bearing. The rule created genuine problems because not every man can grow a decent mustache, and some soldiers ended up with patchy, wispy embarrassments on their faces that projected nothing but genetic misfortune. The regulation was finally abolished in October 1916, presumably because someone realized that facial hair policies weren't winning the war. Beards, interestingly, remained prohibited throughout. 8. In September 1914, the German army was racing toward Paris, and the French needed to rush reinforcements to the front immediately. But trains were overwhelmed, and there weren't enough military vehicles. So General Gallieni, the military governor of Paris, commandeered the city's taxi fleet. Around 600 Renault taxis were rounded up, and each one stuffed 5 soldiers into seats designed for 4. They drove through the night to deliver about 6,000 troops to the Battle of the Marne. Here's the beautiful part. The taxi drivers turned on their meters and charged standard fare for the whole trip. The French government actually paid the taxi bills afterward, roughly 70,000 francs total. It remains the only time in military history that an army took cabs to a major battle and then someone had to process the receipts. 9. By 1917, Germany was desperate to knock Russia out of the war. Their solution was elegantly devious. Vladimir Lenin, the exiled revolutionary leader, was living in Switzerland, desperate to return to Russia and overthrow the government. Germany offered him safe passage through their territory in a sealed train car. The Germans calculated that Lenin would cause so much chaos in Russia that the Eastern Front would collapse. They were absolutely right. Lenin arrived in Petrograd in April 1917. The Bolshevik Revolution happened in November, and Russia sued for peace. Germany essentially mailed a revolutionary to their enemy like a ticking package. It worked perfectly in the short term. In the long term, they helped create the Soviet Union, which would be Germany's nightmare for the next 70 years. Sometimes your brilliant tactical move has strategic consequences. 10. When the British invented tanks in 1916, they needed code names to keep the project secret. The vehicles were called tanks because workers were told they were building mobile water tanks for Mesopotamia. But the naming got weirder. The military officially designated tanks as either male or female, based on their armament. Male tanks carried 2 6-pounder cannons, plus machine guns for destroying fortifications and enemy positions. Female tanks carried only machine guns for infantry support and anti-personnel work. This wasn't slang or informal nicknames. It was the actual official classification system. Military documents seriously discussed deploying males and females to various sectors. Later variants included the hermaphrodite tank, which had 1 cannon and 1 machine gun sponson. Tank gender reveal parties were apparently a thing in 1917, except the announcement was about firepower, not nursery colors. 11. On Christmas Eve 1914, something impossible happened along the Western Front. German soldiers started decorating their trenches with candles and singing carols. British troops heard Stille Nacht drifting across no man's land and responded with their own songs. Then soldiers from both sides climbed out of their trenches, met in the middle, and declared an unofficial ceasefire. They exchanged cigarettes, chocolate, and souvenirs. In several sectors, they organized football matches using helmets and ration tins as goalposts. For one day, men who had been ordered to kill each other played games together instead. Officers on both sides were furious. High Command issued strict orders prohibiting any future fraternization. The message was clear. You are here to hate each other, not recognize your shared humanity. The war continued for 4 more years. 12. Trench warfare meant death could come from any light source. Striking a match at night could draw sniper fire instantly. But officers still needed to read maps, coordinate attacks, and write orders in complete darkness. The solution was surprisingly biological. Soldiers collected glowworms by the hundreds, stuffing them into glass jars to create dim, natural light that wouldn't attract enemy attention from a distance. The soft, bioluminescent glow was just bright enough to read by but too faint to be spotted across no man's land. British and French troops particularly relied on this technique, spending off-duty hours hunting for the insects. There's something profoundly strange about soldiers in the most mechanized war in history, surrounded by artillery and machine guns and poison gas, reading their orders by the light of bugs in a jar like medieval monks. 13. When America entered the war in 1917, anti-German hysteria swept the nation with spectacular pettiness. Anything with a German name had to go. Sauerkraut was renamed Liberty Cabbage because fermented cabbage needed to be patriotic. Hamburgers briefly became Liberty Sandwiches. German measles was called Liberty Measles, which somehow made a childhood disease sound like a political statement. Dachshunds, the German wiener dogs, were renamed Liberty Pups, and some were actually attacked on the streets. German shepherds became Alsatians. Schools dropped German language classes. Orchestras refused to play Beethoven. Towns renamed streets. Some German Americans were forced to kiss the flag publicly or face mob violence. The entire episode demonstrated that wartime patriotism can make people do incredibly stupid things to their vocabulary and their neighbors. 14. The Gallipoli campaign of 1915 was a disaster, and by December, the Allied forces needed to evacuate over 80,000 troops from beaches under Turkish guns. The problem was that any obvious withdrawal would invite devastating attacks, so they invented self-firing rifles. Soldiers rigged their weapons with water cans, string, and funnels. Water would slowly drip from one can to another, and when the weight shifted enough, it pulled the trigger. These contraptions fired randomly throughout the night, making Turkish defenders think the trenches were still fully manned. Meanwhile, the actual soldiers quietly slipped away to evacuation boats. It worked brilliantly. The evacuation was the only successful part of the entire Gallipoli operation, and it was accomplished by basically leaving booby-trapped weapons to pretend humans were still there. 15. World War I was essentially a family dispute with artillery. King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were all first cousins. George and Nicholas looked so similar they could have been twins. Wilhelm was their mutual cousin through Queen Victoria. These 3 men had attended family gatherings together, exchanged birthday gifts, and written each other friendly letters for decades. Then they sent 17 million people to die in trenches. Wilhelm apparently thought his cousins wouldn't dare oppose him. He was wrong. The family relationships made zero difference once mobilization began. After the war, George refused to offer his cousin Nicholas asylum, and Nicholas was executed by revolutionaries. Family reunions must have been awkward after that. The Christmas cards probably stopped. 16. As machine guns and artillery proved devastatingly effective against human flesh, armies started wondering if maybe armor was worth revisiting. The result was a series of experiments that looked like medieval cosplay. Various nations produced steel helmets, of course, but also steel body armor, face shields, and full torso plates. The American Brewster body shield weighed 40 pounds and theoretically stopped rifle bullets. Soldiers wearing it looked like they had wandered in from a King Arthur movie. The problem was mobility. A soldier in full body armor could barely move, couldn't run, couldn't take cover quickly and overheated rapidly. The protection wasn't worth the vulnerability. Most experimental armor was quietly abandoned. The lesson was clear. You can't solve industrial warfare by going backwards to medieval solutions, no matter how cool the armor looks. 17. Sergeant Stubby started his military career as a stray dog wandering around Yale University's campus where soldiers were training. He followed them to France and became the most decorated war dog in American history. Stubby learned to warn his unit of incoming gas attacks before the soldiers could smell it. He located wounded men in no man's land. He once caught a German spy by the seat of his pants and held him until soldiers arrived. For his service, Stubby received actual military rank, numerous medals, and met 3 presidents. He outranked the private who originally smuggled him to France. After the war, Stubby became a celebrity, led parades, and even became Georgetown University's official mascot. A homeless dog achieved more military glory than most humans ever will, which says something about either the dog or the humans. 18. The fortress of Przemyśl in Galicia was Austria-Hungary's 3rd largest city and supposedly impregnable. In 1914, the Russians besieged it. Austria-Hungary sent a relief army. The relief army got destroyed. The fortress surrendered in March 1915 after months of starvation, handing over 117,000 prisoners and a massive stockpile of weapons. It was humiliating. Then in June 1915, a German-Austrian offensive recaptured Przemyśl. Celebrations were brief because the Russians came back and besieged it again in 1916. The Austro-Hungarian leadership had to watch their prize fortress ping-pong between armies, each time costing thousands of lives. The whole saga perfectly captured Austria-Hungary's war experience: ambitious goals, catastrophic execution, and the same disasters happening repeatedly while leadership seemed confused about why things kept going wrong. 19. British soldiers in the trenches received a daily rum ration, typically issued before dawn and especially before major attacks. The logic was straightforward. Men are more willing to charge machine guns if they've had a drink first. The standard issue was about 1/16 of a pint, enough to take the edge off terror without causing actual drunkenness. Officers strictly controlled distribution to prevent soldiers from hoarding or trading rations. Some commanding officers doubled the rum before major offensives. Teetotaler soldiers who refused their ration were considered suspicious. The practice was controversial even then, with temperance advocates arguing that the army was creating alcoholics. But the military's position was essentially practical. Whatever makes men climb out of trenches and walk toward bullets is worth the cost. The rum jar marked SRD officially meant Supply Reserve Depot, but soldiers said it stood for Seldom Reaches Destination. 20. Before bombs became reliable, pilots and observers needed some way to attack ground troops. Enter the fléchette, a simple steel dart about 4 inches long with a pointed tip and stabilizing fins. Aircraft would carry containers holding hundreds or thousands of these darts and dump them over enemy positions. Falling from height, a fléchette could theoretically punch through a helmet and kill a soldier. In practice, the results were disappointing. Hitting a specific person with a falling dart from a moving airplane was basically impossible. Most fléchettes just stuck harmlessly in mud. Even with thousands dropped, confirmed kills were extremely rare. The weapon was more psychological than practical. Soldiers hated knowing that random death darts might fall from the sky at any moment, even if the actual danger was minimal. Eventually, proper bombs made fléchettes obsolete, and this brief, weird chapter of aerial warfare ended. 21. Britain's royal family had a problem in 1917. Their last name was Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which was extremely German. This was awkward when Britain was losing thousands of soldiers fighting Germans, and anti-German sentiment was intense. King George V decided a rebrand was necessary. He invented the name Windsor after the famous castle, and declared that henceforth the royal family would be British-sounding. German titles were dropped. German relatives were quietly distanced. Kaiser Wilhelm, upon hearing about his cousin's name change, reportedly joked that he would attend a performance of The Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. the name change worked brilliantly for public relations. The British royal family has been Windsor ever since, and most people today have no idea their monarchy was thoroughly German until World War I made that fact inconvenient. 22. Germany's master plan for winning the war was called the Schlieffen Plan, named after the general who designed it years earlier. The idea was simple and wildly optimistic. Germany would avoid a two-front war by quickly defeating France in 6 weeks, then turning east to fight Russia. The plan required marching through neutral Belgium because the French border was too fortified. German strategists assumed Belgium would simply let them pass rather than resist a superior force. Belgium did not cooperate. The Belgians fought fiercely, destroying bridges and delaying the German advance. Britain entered the war specifically because Germany violated Belgian neutrality. The quick victory became a grinding stalemate. The entire strategy collapsed because someone assumed a small country would abandon its sovereignty without a fight. The foolproof plan wasn't foolproof at all. 23. Daylight. Saving time exists because of World War I fuel shortages. Germany implemented it first in April 1916, reasoning that shifting clocks forward would mean more daylight during working hours, reducing the need for artificial lighting and saving coal for the war effort. The idea spread rapidly. Britain adopted it weeks later. France followed. The United States implemented it in 1918. After the war, some countries abandoned the practice while others kept it. The debate has continued ever since, with people arguing about energy savings, health effects, and the simple annoyance of changing clocks twice a year. Every time you lose an hour of sleep in spring or wonder why sunset is suddenly different, you can thank German wartime resource management. A temporary coal-saving measure from 1916 somehow became permanent global practice. 24. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, was Imperial Germany's greatest fighter ace with 80 confirmed kills. He painted his aircraft bright red, making himself instantly recognizable to both enemies and allies. This was tactically insane. Camouflage existed. Other pilots used it. Richthofen chose to fly a beacon that screamed, "Shoot at me specifically." His reasoning combined ego, psychological warfare, and squadron morale. Enemy pilots knew the red plane meant the deadliest pilot in the sky. Some reportedly avoided engaging him entirely. His own squadron adopted colorful paint schemes in imitation. The Baron essentially decided that being a terrifying legend was more valuable than being invisible. He was wrong eventually. In April 1918, the bright red triplane was shot down, and Richthofen died at 25. Looking cool and being alive turned out to be competing priorities. 25. The Italian-Austrian front in the Alps created a new kind of horror called the White War. Fighting occurred at elevations above 10,000 feet, in freezing temperatures, on glaciers and mountain peaks. Soldiers died from avalanches, frostbite, and altitude sickness as often as enemy fire. Both sides learned that artillery could trigger avalanches, and they started doing it deliberately. On a single day in December 1916, avalanches killed an estimated 10,000 soldiers on both sides. The mountains themselves became weapons. Men built tunnels through glaciers, hauled artillery up vertical cliffs, and fought in conditions where simply surviving was an achievement. More soldiers died from the environment than from combat. Bodies are still emerging from melting glaciers over a century later, preserved by ice, a frozen testament to the insanity of fighting a war in conditions where nature itself wanted everyone dead. 26. Cher Ami was a carrier pigeon in the United States Army Signal Corps who became a genuine war hero. In October 1918, American troops in the Argonne Forest were trapped behind enemy lines and being shelled by their own artillery, who didn't know their position. Previous messenger pigeons had been shot down. Cher Ami was their last hope. The pigeon flew through German gunfire, was hit by bullets, and kept flying with a shattered leg, a blinded eye, and a hole through the chest. The bird delivered the message, saving nearly 200 men. Army medics worked to save Cher Ami's life, and a tiny wooden leg was carved as a replacement. The pigeon received the French Croix de Guerre and became a celebrity. Cher Ami's body is preserved at the Smithsonian because sometimes a bird accomplishes more than a general. 27. Woodrow Wilson ran for re-election in 1916 with the campaign slogan, "He kept us out of war." American voters, not wanting their sons dying in European trenches, re-elected him in November. Wilson gave his second inaugural address in March 1917, speaking about peace. Then, in April 1917, exactly 1 month later, Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. Americans suddenly found themselves in the exact war Wilson promised to avoid. The shift happened partly because German submarines kept sinking American ships, and the Zimmermann telegram revealed Germany proposing a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. Still, the speed of the reversal was remarkable. Wilson went from peace candidate to war president faster than most people change their minds about lunch. His "kept us out of war" slogan aged poorly within weeks. 28. The shell crisis of 1915 was a spectacular failure of British logistics. Soldiers at the front were being told to limit artillery fire to a few shells per day because there simply wasn't enough ammunition. Meanwhile, German artillery fired seemingly unlimited barrages. The problem was that nobody had anticipated the war's massive ammunition consumption. British factories couldn't produce shells fast enough. The weapons existed. The bullets didn't. Political scandal erupted when newspapers reported that soldiers were dying because of ammunition shortages, while factories sat idle due to labor disputes and bureaucratic failures. The crisis brought down the government and led to the creation of a new Ministry of Munitions under David Lloyd George. It turned out that modern industrial warfare required modern industrial production, and Britain had started the war completely unprepared for that reality. 29. The Britannic was the largest of the 3 Olympic-class ocean liners, sister ship to the Titanic. She was supposed to be the safest, with improved watertight compartments and more lifeboats installed after the Titanic disaster. The Britannic never carried a single paying passenger. World War I broke out before her maiden voyage, and she was converted into a hospital ship, painted white with huge red crosses. In November 1916, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, she struck a German mine and sank in under an hour, killing 30 people. 2 out of 3 sister ships now lay at the bottom of the sea. The third ship, Olympic, served as a troop transport throughout the war and somehow survived, making her the only sister to retire normally. The Titanic's legacy apparently included a family curse. 30. The influenza pandemic of 1918 killed more people than World War I itself, and the war's response made everything worse. The virus spread through military camps and troop ships, then jumped to civilian populations worldwide. Estimates suggest 50 to 100 million deaths globally. Wartime censorship meant that governments suppressed news about the outbreak to maintain morale. Spain, being neutral, had no censorship, so Spanish newspapers reported openly on the disease. This created the false impression that Spain was hit hardest, leading to the name Spanish flu, even though it didn't originate there. Soldiers were packed into trenches and transport ships, creating perfect conditions for transmission. The combination of a deadly virus, wartime censorship, and military logistics turned an epidemic into a global catastrophe that dwarfed the war's body count. 31. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 required Germany to pay reparations set at 132 billion gold marks, roughly equivalent to $442 billion today. The Allied Commission essentially invented this number. It bore no relationship to actual damages or Germany's ability to pay. The amount was designed partly for domestic political consumption, showing voters that Germany would suffer. Germany couldn't pay. Economic collapse followed. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency. Resentment festered. Adolf Hitler built his political career on denouncing the treaty as an unjust humiliation. The reparations weren't fully paid off until 2010, nearly a century later. Historians still debate whether the treaty was too harsh, too lenient, or simply badly designed. What's clear is that punishing a nation into economic ruin turned out to be an excellent way to create conditions for an even worse war. 32. Henry Gunther was an American soldier of German descent who had been demoted from sergeant for writing a letter discouraging a friend from enlisting. On November 11, 1918, as the armistice approached, Gunther's unit received orders to continue advancing until exactly 11 a.m. when the ceasefire began. At 10:59 a.m., with 60 seconds remaining in the entire war, Gunther charged a German machine gun position. The German gunners, knowing the war was about to end, waved him off. He kept charging. They fired. Henry Gunther became the last American soldier killed in World War I, dying at 10:59 a.m., 1 minute before peace. He was posthumously restored to the rank of sergeant. Whether he was trying to prove his patriotism, restore his honor, or simply lost his mind will never be known. He died for 60 seconds of war. 33. They called it the war to end all wars. The destruction was so unprecedented, the carnage so horrifying, that surely humanity would never do this again. The League of Nations would ensure peace. The world had learned its lesson. Except absolutely none of that happened. The Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany, creating resentment that Adolf Hitler exploited. The League of Nations had no power to enforce anything. Colonial borders were redrawn carelessly, creating future conflicts. The Russian Revolution led to the Soviet Union. The Ottoman Empire's collapse led to chaos in the Middle East. Every solution created new problems. 20 years later, the sequel arrived, bigger, deadlier, and proving that the war to end all wars was the most ironically wrong name in human history. 17 million dead, empires collapsed, and a peace treaty so badly written it guaranteed a sequel. Now here's what I want to know. Which country do you think made the single dumbest decision in this entire war? Was it Austria-Hungary starting it over one guy? Germany betting everything on Belgium rolling over? Britain with the Gallipoli disaster? France with the red pants? Drop your verdict in the comments and defend your pick. If this video taught you something new, hit like and subscribe. More absurd history is coming.